Hey everybody, this is John with the fourth episode of Think Culture Daily. And today I wanted to talk about Cuties because it's been in the news, it's controversial, and I don't think that people are really talking about it in the right way. So I wanted to go ahead and address it a little bit here. There's kind of two sort of knee-jerk reactions to it, right? I think that a lot of people like me who have not seen it get the sense that something is sort of amiss, that there's been some kind of that there's a kind of fundamental immorality, right? That's that's being put on screen, and that's what Cuties is. I don't want to conclusively say something like that. I tend to err on the side of artists, although today we don't really have artists. They don't really exist. And obviously we have the culture industry, which is what I'm going to talk about. But I have to stress my natural my natural inclination is to side with the artists. Upon seeing it, there may be kind of one of these, if it's pornographic, I'll know when I see it or whatever, although I don't know if I'm going to see it. I don't want to live in a world, I would rather live in a world where Nabokov writes Lolita than not, right? I would rather live in a world where Lars von Trier makes Nymphomaniac than not. I think that art is about, in some sense, provoking distress and revulsion and animosity and breaking taboos and engaging with the forbidden, etc. I don't know that that's what's going on here, and I don't know whether it has really more of a pornographic character or more of a kind of artistic character. So I can't really say conclusively one way or the other on that score. However, I can sympathize based on what I've seen with people who are thinking that what we're watching is really the sexual exploitation of children. I'm I'm laughing at the peculiarity of this being sort of a topic of conversation in our public discourse. But in any event, there is a equal and opposite reaction, I guess, coming from the left, from the mainstream media, etc., which is to not just defend the film, not just to it's not just to defend the film, it's to sort of honor it, right? To there's this phrase I saw recently, the deification of lowlives. That's what a lot of the left's activities are. This was specifically in reference to BLM. But one could say maybe something similar is happening with the movie. There's a kind of reactionary spirit on the left, such that anything that the right criticizes or hates or derides or whatever has to be held up as as exemplar of everything good about life, right? I saw in the New Yorker, for example. I'll look up the name of it. So I didn't read the article, but people are talking about this New Yorker article, right, called "Cuties: The Extraordinary Netflix Debut That Became the Target of a Right-Wing Campaign." And it's apparently a kind of glowing review, right? I did scan it, and it doesn't. So it seems to me that a responsible take, right? And this is a take I'm not seeing anywhere. It would be to engage with this question of where the line should be, whether it has been crossed, how one is to determine, what is an artful broaching of a taboo and what is sheerly pornographic or ought to be maybe not censored, but not produced or something like that. There are pros and cons to be weighed, right? And one could have a discussion about whether or not this is over the line, what the risks are in exerting the kind of control over artistic production that would not allow it to be made or censor it or whatever, right? But none of that seems to be in this article or anywhere else. Any of the other defenders. There's simply a celebration of the content of the film, which it may be a good film, I don't know. But it's interesting to me that this discussion, the ambiguity, right, the sort of what I would say the kind of natural ambivalence with respect to evaluating things like this that I would expect, I don't see, which is strange. But in any case, I've been thinking about it in terms of the culture industry, right? The chapter in the Dialectic of Enlightenment, in which the Dialectic of Enlightenment, it's also, it's about mass deception, right? But they have this idea that basically something like I said at the beginning, I don't think we really have artists anymore, right? These are mass-produced commodities. That's what a film like this is. It is not the work of an individual artistic genius or whatever, which doesn't mean that it can't have artistic merits. But what it does mean is that it should be evaluated to some degree as such. No one really seems to be doing that either. So in the culture industry, for example, they talk about the way that let me see if I can find the passage here where they're talking about, they say that it's ideology, right? It's maybe I don't want to just browse forever. So I may give up. But they're saying, they say, for example, that what we're talking about. Oh, here we go. I think this promise of the work of art to create truth by impressing its unique contours on the socially transmitted forms is as necessary as it is hypocritical by claiming to anticipate. By claiming to anticipate fulfillment through their aesthetic derivatives, it posits the real forms of the existing order as absolute. To this extent, the claims of art are always also ideology. Right? So the point for me here being that the question of Cuties is a question of ideology, right? And the culture industry is not, it isn't mass art, right? This is at mass deception. The culture industry, enlightenment as mass deception, right? The masses are being deceived. It's popular art, popular entertainment, but it's imposed from the top down, right? And it's inherently ideological, and it has a particular kind of function aside from its generating profits, right? A lot of people, they when we're talking about works of art, when we're talking about the culture industry or entertainment or whatever, or woke capitalism, a lot of people's interpretation is sort of one step and then it breaks down. They're like, they're just trying to make money, or maybe even this is a better take, a little further. Maybe even they're like outrage culture or something like that. They're just trying to get attention however possible, to draw clicks, whatever, get more people to buy it, money-making endeavor, etc. With woke capitalism, I know I saw Vosh the other day, he said that he thinks about BLM, right, that corporations back BLM in their marketing campaigns and stuff like that, or even donate to them, because that idea is popular and they want to make money. So they're trying to capture this demographic to make money. That's wrong. That's naive. It's overly simplistic. It's overly simplistic in the case of Cuties, right? Because, as they say, art is always also ideology, right? And it's imposed from the top. So the question becomes, what is the ideological function of something like Cuties? And I think that there is a element of what they call like repressive desublimation, right? You're being titillated. Your desires are being fulfilled, insofar as one could say that something like this would fulfill a desire, even if it's like in terms of rubbernecking, right? Like part of this isn't normally the kind of movie I would want to see anyway, but part of the urge to see something like this would be this kind of urge to rubberneck, right? Lacan talks about it as scopophilia, right? People want to engage in a kind of, like, we want to see the spectacle, we want to see the catastrophe. Like, people are saying this is a horrible thing, we want to see if it's really horrible, like, for ourselves or whatever, right? There's a kind of voyeuristic dimension to everyone. We all have this scopophilic drive. So there's that, and there's kind of the, in general, the eroticism of film and of art. It's there's a kind of function of repressive desublimation. Like, we have these desires, these sexual urges, whatever, things like the scopophilic drive, and then they're satisfied, right? Even satisfied in the form of a taboo, like Cuties. They're satisfied so that we don't have to sublimate. That's what this idea of repressive desublimation is. In Freud, we have instincts, right? Not just in Freud, but in psychoanalysis in general. We have instincts, we have baser desires. We want things that society says that we're not allowed to have, right? And as a consequence of that, we have to repress those urges and those desires. And that energy gets, if the repression is being handled in kind of a healthy way, the energy associated with those ideas gets redirected, right? And we have sublimation. So true works of art, high art, etc., they're products of sublimation. Art itself exists for reasons of sublimation. Freud says that civilization is a consequence of sublimation, therefore repression is required, right? In consumer capitalism, you want people to be consumers, right? So you actually, you find out by giving everybody what they desire, their immediate bodily gratifications, they're being satisfied at this sort of baser animal level, then you don't get this sublimation effect. So you don't get people studying theory or whatever. You just, they consume all of their sort of libidinal energy in the direct act of just getting what they immediately want. They're not required to sublimate. So that's something that's going on, right? I think that there's an important that's an important dimension. But I also think, like, as far as Cuties, there's this idea of, like, our sexual being is the core of who we are, right? We're identity obsessed, and that identity, I think the movie plays with, like, race and religion and stuff like that too. So this would also be part of it, a kind of identity obsessionalism or whatever. But our sex, our desire, right? In progressive discourse, which again I say is hegemonic. We're in hegemonic progressive neoliberalism. That's what Nancy Fraser calls it. So desire is central. That's what we view as, like, the central kernel of our being, right? And liberalism is an order in which we're supposed to pursue our own happiness, which means satisfy our desires. So we are desire. We satisfy it by going out and consuming, by consuming products that fulfill our desires, so that we don't sublimate, and this keeps us in a state of submission. What was I saying? So yeah, liberalism wants you to consume, to satisfy your desires, etc., to understand yourself as desire, and that being the most central part of who you are. that requires satisfaction in some form, right? We have to do it, or it's perceived of as a kind of authoritarian imposition or restriction on our freedom, on our ability to be free, which is supposed to be inviolable. If I'm really free, I should be able to pursue and satisfy all of my desires instantly, right? That's the liberal idea, and it's related to these ideas of individualism, etc., right? So there's some sort of preliminary thoughts about it. I haven't seen it again, but I think it's important that people think about things in a way that's more adequate to the problems that are faced in our society and by all of us. Evaluating things like this is, I think, important. And so these kind of snap judgments, the kind of one-step analyses of them, etc. and so forth, I think that's not good. It's not good at all. And I also think that we could talk about the opposite, right? I remembered when I was thinking about this, an article that I had seen a while back in American Conservative, which is one of my favorite outlets. I'm going to try to pull it up here for you. So I remembered an article. I thought it was a whole article. It's apparently not. But there's an interesting little tidbit. So I'll show it to you here. So, this. Yesterday I started watching the Netflix series Babylon Berlin, a crime drama set in the Weimar Republic. In the first episode, the Vice Squad busts a porno shoot in which the actors are turning the nativity into an orgy. What is so chilling about that scene is the banality of the blasphemy. It's just business in Weimar Germany. And that, I take it, is the point. That late Weimar culture is so decadent that even something as defiling as that porn scenario is treated as par for the course. Okay? We know what came next for Weimar Germany. So that was... I remembered that, right? I thought it was a whole essay. It's actually just this paragraph. But I remembered that. And I think that it's important for us to think about things like that. Like, what if the thing that's so horrific about, the sexualization of children or whatever, to some degree, it's suggestive of our being the kind of culture in which these things are just business. It's just part of the culture industry. It's just there as a product for your consumption, We're, I mean, there's some backlash about it, which I guess, sort of suggests that maybe we're not in exactly the same sort of situation. But I don't know. I mean, we're surrounded by, the pornographic everything all the time. And I think that our culture is a lot closer to Babylon Berlin than one might like to believe. And these are some things he adds. I forgot to read. There are no politicians on earth capable of turning this tide of decadence. The power of the culture is far too strong. So that suggests, one, that the true battle is metapolitical. It's a battle of the culture, right? Two, that this is unstoppable. Decadence is is simply a fact, right? Decay is a fact of life and of the life span of a culture. That would be my perspective. You cannot expect your children to be salt and light to a culture that gives its highest honor to a movie celebrating... This is about The Shape of Water. To a movie celebrating bestiality as an act of liberation. So, I mean, the similarity here also is that The Shape of Water is about a kind of illicit love, an illicit erotic relationship. And there's an illicit, taboo eroticism in this movie as well. This is a kind of theme, which, make of it what you will in terms of thinking about us in relation to Babylon Berlin, right? Soon people who believe the things you do will be regarded as perverted and dangerous to the common good. Are you ready for that? This is another one that's sort of chilling because, again, think about the New Yorker headline, right? Think about the New Yorker article. It's not just them. All over the place, right? They're like, the real danger of Cuties is right-wing opposition to it. That sort of thing. The real problem with pedophilia is people oppose it. That's they would like to characterize people who don't like these things, who object, who want to assert a moral standard, and that taboos are taboos because they're bad for society, because we need to ward certain things off for the health of our culture, right? If such people are perceived as a threat, as a danger, as in their own way a kind of pervert that needs to be stopped, then that's suggestive of certain kind of systemic problems in your society. But I just one last thing, right? I wanted to my guy Patrick Deneen, and he wrote Why Liberalism Failed, which is a good book. I'll probably cover it at some point on my channel. It's interesting. He's the basic thesis of that book, since I'm mentioning him, and he's a political science professor at Notre Dame, I believe. And the thesis of that book is basically liberalism has reached the kind of severe crisis that we're in right now, on sort of multiple fronts, not because of the failure of our society to fully practice liberalism or anything like that, but because of how successful liberalism is, because of the degree to which it's been successfully implemented, to which it's been perfected, etc. Because there are certain, in that all of the sort of nodes of crisis which have appeared in our society are consequences of liberalism succeeding, doing exactly what it was supposed to do, exactly what people wanted it to do, etc. Right? And he's talking about this, like the individualism, the avarice, whatever. I'll do a video on it eventually. And he talks about how, our debate in this country has been, as I've talked about somewhat before, sort of social liberals versus economic liberals. That's sort of the left and right in our country, and that they both work together in a kind of, cyclical sort of fashion to take us down the road of liberalism. The perfection of liberalism involves this kind of reciprocal interaction between social and economic liberals, but that they both have, even though they're at war, they both have the same objectives, which is the autonomous free individual who doesn't have the restraints imposed on him by the culture, by his family, etc., who's just pursuing his desires, consuming, etc. He's homo economicus or whatever, okay? But he wrote something on Twitter, several tweets in a row, a tweet thread, that I thought was interesting and that relates to what we've been talking about. So I'll pull that up and read it real quick. Thread. A long-standing narrative in the modern West is that conservatism is the ideology of the elite. Progressivism is the ideology of the people. This narrative has been mainly advanced by a left-leaning intelligentsia. The dominant narrative is a prototypical form of Whig history and neglects both the inherent elitism of progressivism, see John Stuart Mill, and the inherent populism of conservatism, see Edmund Burke. Conservatism was born when a new elite emerged, an elite whose main ambition was to replace existing cultures with an anti-culture. Conservatives like Edmund Burke and Benjamin Disraeli, sought to align the traditional aristocratic elite with the innate conservatism of the people. The great contest of the past several centuries has been who was correct. Are the people ultimately revolutionary and hence align with progressive elites? Or are they conservative and align with conservative elites? Tragically, a conservative elite popular alignment was circumvented in the United States because of the rise of progressivism. This progressivism was not merely a left liberal phenomenon. It pervades every domain of elite American society. Progressivism shaped the elites to favor one of two revolutionary forms, economic or cultural. The first we call conservative, the second liberal. Today, those two elite forms have combined in the form of woke capitalism. Rather than an elite that predicts a bottom-up culture, the kind of elite favored by Burke or Disraeli, today we are subject to a revolutionary popular culture that is generated by elites, Hollywood, music, etc. He's talking about the culture industry. These cultural forms are intended to destroy culture. Yet one sees a degree of revulsion to such elite-generated cultural content such as WAP and Cuties. These forms of popular culture are the opposite of the culture created and fostered from the bottom up. Rituals, festivals, formal observance of human and natural rhythms. Conservatives should understand that a primary duty of elites is not to defend the blessings of liberty, but ferociously defend the remnants of traditional culture against their destruction by revolutionary popular culture. And given the wholesale destruction of genuine bottom-up cultural forms by a revolutionary progressive elite, conservatives must look to foster conditions for the emergence of genuine culture to combat the pervasive anti-culture. So the anti-culture he's talking about is what we were talking about with the culture industry, right? And the culture industry, it's mass deception. It isn't culture that emerges organically or spontaneously from the people in a bottom-up kind of fashion. It's culture being imposed upon the masses, right? That's why we ask this question about insofar as a work of art is ideological, which it certainly is. They're expressive of a particular ideological orientation. They're trying to inculcate a particular worldview, a particular anthropology of human beings, etc., and so forth. They convey a whole metaphysical, ontological understanding of the universe, right? It sounds intense, but I think it's true. Ayn Rand, who I'm not a huge fan of necessarily, but she said in her Romantic Manifesto, which I liked when I was younger, and I've always remembered this phrase, she says that art is the concretization of man's metaphysics. And I agree with that, except that's the organic understanding of it, right? In terms of the culture industry, it's the concretization of the metaphysics of the elite, or the metaphysic that they want to impose upon the masses, right? So that's why we have to ask this question of what is the ideology, not whether or not I think that Cuties is over the line or not, but what is the ideology reflected in a movie like Cuties? Why is this being served up to the masses? Why is this the metaphysic being foisted upon us, right? That's the question that one has to ask. And I think it has to do with, the various things that we've been mentioning already. But it is totally important, I think, to remember that this is, when people are defending cultural products like this, products of the culture industry, they're not, and that this is a knee-jerk kind of thing for progressives, but which is stupid because it shows they have not understood the culture industry, or any of their nominally formative philosophical works, right? When they have this knee-jerk defense of products of the culture industry like this, what they're defending, okay, is the right for business interests, for elite interests, for the managerial elite to impose a worldview, okay, to impose a certain structure of imagination or whatever on society, to establish the social imaginary, right? They're not defending the right of artists to be creative and push boundaries and stuff necessarily, which I said I myself have kind of a my natural inclination is to defend that, but it's important to understand that's not what's happening, right? That is not what's happening. It may be an artistic work, a film, maybe not, but it is a product of the culture industry. Anyway, I hope that was somewhat interesting. This really gets at the motto of my channel, right? Because I'm suggesting that you do not simply react, but think culture.